Thank you so much for joining us today for Setting Up for Success, Preparing High School Students for College-Level Math. This webinar is hosted by the New York Research Partnership for Alternative Pathways and the Rhode Island Pipelines to College and Career Research Partnership. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Catherine Shields, who will be moderating today's webinar. Good afternoon, Catherine, and have a great session.
Thank you, Shanna. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Catherine Shields, a researcher with the Regional Educational Laboratory Northeast Islands, and this webinar grew out of interest from two of our state research partnerships. Both are looking at ways to reduce the number of high school graduates who place into remedial education in math, sometimes referred to as developmental education. The New York Partnership for Alternative Pathways is focused on research that informs its policies related to graduation pathways as well as college and career readiness. And the Rhode Island Pipelines to College and Career Research Partnership uses research to increase public college access and degree completion rates, especially for high-need students, and uses data to strengthen students' trajectories into growth industries. Today, our webinar will begin with an overview of findings from an impact evaluation of a high school-based program which aims to reduce college math remediation rates. Then we'll hear from a practitioner's perspective on what it takes to implement such a program at a statewide level. And you'll have a chance to ask questions at the end of our presenters. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters. Our guest researcher is Dr. Angela Boatman of Vanderbilt University, where she is Assistant Professor of Public Policy and Higher Education. Her research explores the outcomes of policies designed to increase college completion for populations traditionally underrepresented in higher education, and she's currently conducting several large-scale studies on the impact of innovations in the delivery of remedial courses. Dr. Boatman is a faculty affiliate of the Center for the Analysis of Post-Secondary Readiness, housed at the Community College Research Center at Teachers College, and she's also an affiliate of the Center for Education Policy Research at Harvard University. Our discussant is Dr. Marla Davis from the Mississippi Department of Education, where she is Bureau Director for Secondary Curriculum and Instruction. In that role, she provides support to educators, administrators, and curriculum coordinators on the Common Core state standards, as well as on math assessments and STEM education. For her work implementing the Math Readiness program that she's going to talk about today, Dr. Davis was awarded the President's Trailblazer Award from the Southern Regional Education Board. She also has many years' experience in the classroom as a secondary math teacher. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Boatman.
Thank you. I am really happy to be here today. I'm going to share some background on the innovative college remediation effort known as SAILS, and I'll talk about the SAILS program in more detail, which is taking place in high schools across Tennessee. And I'm also going to share some of the findings from our recent research study that was looking at the impacts of SAILS on students' college outcomes 2 years later. So the research I'm going to discuss was a collective effort across several partners, primarily in the state of Tennessee. It was myself here at Vanderbilt, along with a graduate student, along with some co-authors from Harvard's Center for Ed Policy Research. But it also involved multiple state agencies across Tennessee. So that included the Tennessee Department of Education, representing the K-12 sector, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, Tennessee Board of Regents, Measure Tennessee, which is a consortium that provided the data for the study, the SAILS program itself, which stands for Seamless Alignment and Integrated Learning Support. They were an instrumental partner in this work. ACT, which I will talk about a little later, and then the entire research project was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I may not need to tell this audience, but college remediation touches a pretty significant number of college students each year. So over 2/3 of students attending community colleges report taking at least one remedial course. Typically those courses are in math or English. And that's about 40% of students attending four-year colleges. And in the past couple of years, we have seen some really good research, rigorous, strong research out there that has largely concluded when looking at the effects of these courses overall, we've sort of seen these null or negative effects on student persistence, students' degree completion when enrolling in remedial courses. And so there's been a lot of criticism of the effectiveness of remedial courses in college, but again, they are affecting such large numbers of students. However, we haven't seen evaluations looking at whether remedial courses are actually improving students' content knowledge, math knowledge, in the case of a math course. And so that's really largely what our study set out to examine. But of course, colleges who continue to serve students regardless of their level of academic preparation have begun already to experiment with the ways they offer these courses. And that has taken many different forms. I'm sure you've heard of a lot of these different types of interventions, including blended learning courses, co-requisite courses, where the remediation class is taught alongside the college level course simultaneously, summer bridge programs. The goal of all of these innovations is to improve students' academic success. And so the Tennessee Sales Program is one example of an alternative model to traditional math remediation. So it's another really nice example of an innovation taken on by a state. And it is in many ways a collaboration between the K-12 and higher ed systems in the state of Tennessee. So the sales math course is a college remedial math course that's offered in the senior year of high school. And it has a very different format than a traditional high school course. The instruction is it's delivered entirely online, and the students work at their own pace at computers, either in a computer lab, at laptops, in their math classroom. The teachers are available in the classroom, and they're providing more individual assistance or tutoring, not in a traditional lecture-style course typically seen in high school math classes. The program has 5 modules, and once students complete all 5 of the modules with an exam at the end of each module that's proctored by their teacher, they are considered to have completed the course. And a really key component of this program is a position known as the field coordinator. And the field coordinators are people who are based in the region's community colleges who visit high school classrooms regularly and have a set of high schools they visit on a rotation. And they help to train the high school math teachers to ensure consistent implementation of the curriculum, and then also to help the teachers in monitoring student progress so that if there is an issue, they're able to note this earlier than later, and there can be some kind of intervention or support provided. And so already that classroom description should sound pretty different than a typical high school math course because you've got college liaisons essentially visiting high school classes on a regular basis. But it's also structurally different. So the sales course operates quite differently when it comes to the longer trajectory towards college going. So in the traditional high school college pathway, a student would take their ACT score in Tennessee in their junior year of high school. Almost all students in Tennessee take the ACT in 11th grade, and they receive a score on the math portion of that test. And that score is then determines a student's need for remediation once in college. So a student gets a score in the traditional model in 11th grade, and that then the student then goes on to take their 12th grade math course. And in this case, in a traditional pathway, they would take just a typical 12th grade math course. The student would then, if he or she goes on to college, they would then be placed in remedial math in college because their 11th grade score was below where it needed to be to pass into college level math. So that student would then, in the traditional pathway, need to take their remedial course either before college math or alongside college math. However, if a student attends a high school where sales is available, the student would then instead take sales during their senior year of high school. And so the sales course effectively exempts a student from needing remediation once in college. So that student would then enroll in college directly into their college level math course and would not need to first take a remedial math course or take a co-requisite math course, thus freeing up time to take a different course, for example. And the sales program began with a pilot and began in 12-13 and scaled up significantly the following year. So this picture just shows the scale up on the left set of bars over time. And then you can see that there are still a little over 150 high schools that do not have sales offered in the high school. The sales program has been very intentional about its scale up because they wanted to ensure that they can provide support necessary for the successful implementation. So they have been intentional about the amount and the number of new schools they bring on board each additional year. So of course, in order to isolate the effects of the sales program, this would be a challenge anyway, given that there are issues of selection as to who enrolls in the sales course in the first place. But this turns out to be especially difficult in a state like Tennessee that has so many exciting, interesting higher ed policy changes going on. So many of you may be familiar with the Tennessee Promise, which is a statewide policy that impacts recent high school graduates, allowing them to enroll directly into Tennessee's community colleges and a handful of four-year colleges tuition-free. And so that policy was adopted in 2014-15 for the graduating class of 2015, which is kind of right in the middle of this large scale-up of the sales program. And then also that same fall, in the fall of 2015-16, the state adopted co-requisite remediation. And this is where they moved from having a standalone remedial math course that preceded the college-level math course to co-requisite courses where those two courses were taken alongside one another. And so these are two pretty significant changes that happened in state policy right in the kind of the middle of the years of our study, looking at evaluating the impact of the sales program. So we had to do some fancy methodological work here to try to isolate that impact in light of some other pretty big policy changes that were going on. And if you're interested in more of the technical details of how we did this and how that interacted with other state changes, I would refer you to the full research report that we wrote. It's referenced in the policy brief that is available on this webinar. You can find all of the more technical details there. But essentially, in summary, we created two different comparison groups to address this issue. The first was we isolated a comparison group of students who had the same ACT math scores, being below the cutoff for sales, who both did and did not attend high schools that offered the program. So we looked at the years before there ever even was a sales program, all the way up until the most recent year of data we had, and then we used the fact that there were high schools in the state that did not yet adopt the program. And so we had a comparison group there. And then we also created a second comparison group looking at students who scored just above and below the 19 cutoff on the ACT math test. So we used the students who scored just above the cutoff as the control group for the students who scored just below. And for that, we only used 1 year of data due to a partnership with ACT that I will describe a little bit more in a minute. But so these were our two comparison groups that we used in our analysis. And largely what we found was pretty interesting in the sense that the effects were different based on the context of the overall state at the time. So we first examined the effects of sales in the 2013-14 cohort of seniors. And this was before the Tennessee Promise existed, before there was statewide co-requisite remediation. And this is actually a state context more similar to the majority of states out there who don't yet have a statewide free community college program or statewide co-requisite program. So we thought there was value in studying the early years of sales in a context that might mirror more of the states that are out there. And we found that we didn't see any effects really on sales eligibility on students completing high school or on enrolling in college. But we did see this pretty dramatic drop in the percent of students that needed to take remedial math in college, which is exactly what we would expect. That's sort of by definition how the program should be working. And then we see subsequently an increase in the percent of students that took college-level math and passed it during their first year of college. We also saw that sales students earned about 2.2 more college credits by their second year. We didn't see a significant effect on college persistence or on earning a credential within 2 years, but again, we only had 2 years of follow-up data here. That might not be enough time to observe degree attainment or credential attainment. But generally, in this early sort of pre-Tennessee Promise context, we see what we would consider pretty positive findings of the SAILS program on students enrolling in college math and earning college level credits. We also looked at some subgroups here for each of our different cohorts of students. And I think this is a really important note here. We actually saw the strongest improvements for the lowest scoring students when it came to SAILS. So we saw the largest effects here for students with ACT math scores that were at or below 16. And this is, I think, really important given how difficult it can be to see success with students with these really low levels of incoming academic preparation. We also looked by gender, and it appears that the improvements that we were seeing in student outcomes were largely being driven by women. Also interesting to note, given that this is a math intervention, this is in remedial math. So then when we looked at the later cohorts, those cohorts that were impacted also by co-requisite remediation and the Tennessee Promise, we see a similar drop here, actually exactly the same estimate, a 28 percentage point decrease in taking remedial math within the first year. So again, largely what we might expect to see, but we no longer saw the gains here in taking and passing college level math. But digging in further to these results, this was largely due to the co-requisite policy superseding the SAILS program here, because that, by definition, that policy allowed all students to take college level courses. So regardless of what your incoming ACT score was or whether or not you participated in SAILS, you now were allowed to enroll, and in fact encouraged to enroll directly in college level math. And so some of those effects that we saw in the early cohort, they essentially disappear for this later cohort. And then we didn't see significant subgroup differences here, really by ACT score, gender, or race. So one of the big research questions that was driving our inquiry here was on whether or not students were, if any of this was related to an increase in retaining math content that came as a result of the SAILS program. And so in order to estimate this, we needed to re-administer an assessment at the end of their senior year math course. And so we worked closely with ACT, who helped us to design a shortened assessment. So this was an ACT math test that would fit into a class period, but we worked closely with them to make sure that these tests were aligned, that we could make the comparisons we wanted to make. So it was a 35-question assessment. We administered it to students at 119 schools across Tennessee, ultimately received responses from about almost 70% of the students. And then as part of that ACT post-test, we also included a short survey. It was just a 15-question survey asking students about their attitudes about math and about college going. And this was a pretty unique aspect of our study because we were really trying to see if there was anything being gained when it came to math content from the junior year ACT through the end of their senior year math course. And we did not find that SAILS participation improved performance on the ACT math test any more than students taking other senior year math courses. And that's evident here in this picture where you can see the cutoff here of the ACT cutoff. It's been rescaled to be just a finer measure, but that red bar represents the 19 on the ACT math test. And you can see there's not really a jump here in either direction between the students just below the cutoff that were eligible for SAILS and the students just above. So we didn't see improved math performance for SAILS, but again, this is just for students right at the cutoff for assignment to the SAILS program. But on those student survey responses, at the same time, students were reporting positive impacts on their perceptions of math. So SAILS students were 7 percentage points more likely to report that their senior year math course content would be useful in their career, or 10 percentage points more likely to report being better prepared for college-level math. They reported being more interested in math. Interestingly, they were less likely to report that their class stays busy, but having visited a number of sales classrooms and talked with field coordinators as well as math course instructors, this could also be due to the work-at-your-own-pace nature of the courses, and that high school students aren't typically used to having this free time in which to structure their course. So they could perceive this as, not being quite as busy. But generally, we saw these positive impacts on students' attitudes towards taking math as a result of sales. So at the end of this study, we concluded that sales was definitely effective in shifting remediation back to high school. I got a lot of students, a large number of students out of remediation in college, and that is exactly what the program was intended to do. In the 2013-14 cohort, prior to these other policy changes in Tennessee, it increased the proportion of students that were taking college math by 14 percentage points, and by the end of their second year, they had completed more college credits. In later years, we continued to see that the remediation need went down, but again, the effects largely disappeared due to the other larger policy changes that were going on in the state. But regardless of cohort, the sales students did report more positive experiences in the course. There are a couple of important caveats with this research. We are only looking at students coming right out of high school. Those were the ones that were eligible for sales in high school but then went right on into college courses. So we're missing students who may take some time off in between high school and college. We looked only at community college students only, as this was largely the population, that was largely where this population was attending. But we also have a pretty limited time frame, 2 years. The hope is to continue following students into years 3 and 4 to see if there's maybe a longer term impact of the sales program. So there were a couple, I think, just final notes here about this research, and then I'm interested in the conversation to follow. So of the additional students that took college-level math, only about half of those students passed the college-level math course. So while we saw that this program opened up college math to a new group of students, and if we believe college math, getting to college math is a barrier, an unnecessary barrier for some students, this would be a success. It did open up that course to a new group of students. But it does raise the question as to what are the barriers for students once they are in that college-level math course. With only about half of the new students passing that course, what are some of the other barriers that might be getting in their way? And it also raises some pretty important questions about how well college-level math might be aligned with students' subsequent course taking or their major, the best way to assess remedial needs, calling it up questions of, is the ACT math the assessment tool? How about considering multiple measures or assessments when students get to college? That's a larger conversation that our study didn't delve into, but Tennessee was largely using the ACT math for assessment. And also this, I think it's important to consider the long-term outcomes of a co-requisite model, which a lot of research recently is attempting to do. So I will be paying close attention to some of the long-term impacts that we see from the co-requisite model. And I'll just conclude by saying I really think it was clear that leaders in Tennessee were to be applauded, not only for adopting a pretty innovative K-12 higher ed partnership program in college remediation, but really also for taking the risk to assess its impact. There are really, really important questions in remedial education out there where we still don't have answers as to whether these programs work, who they work for, and how they work. And so states like Tennessee who are willing to take the risk to assess one of their own programs, I think are really to be commended. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Boatman. If you have any questions for Dr. Boatman about the Tennessee Sales Program or about the findings from this evaluation, please post them in the chat. I see some folks have already put some questions there that we'll get to at the end. So now we'd like to take a moment and hear from our audience. So there's going to be a poll question on the screen. Just please click to answer. What strategies have you used in your institution to prepare students for college math? And you can select all that apply. So some of these might be things that happen in high school, like the Tennessee Sales Program, or they might be things like a summer bridge program between high school and college. And then there's a lot of exciting innovations going on at the college level, such as co-requisite or accelerated remedial classes and other models. So I see we have some folks chiming in. It looks like a few people have used high school prerequisite courses and a few administering a college placement test during high school. It looks like a handful of people have also worked with co-requisite college remediation courses. So that's great to see. Thank you. So I know we've got a good range of people represented, work at both schools, districts, states, and institutions of higher education here in the audience. So thank you for sharing what you're working on now. Great. So I'd like to now turn this over to Dr. Marla Davis, who will be talking with us about her experience as a practitioner. And Marla, you can take it away.
Good afternoon. Again, Marla Davis from the Mississippi Department of Education. And I'll be sharing with you all some information as it relates to our, we call them transitional courses in the state of Mississippi. We have actually tried to move away from using the connotation of remediation as it relates to supporting our students that are struggling below grade level and those that are having deficiencies in math and also in literacy ELA. And so what we've actually put in place in the state of Mississippi is a continuum to support our students that are transitioning from middle school into high school, and also for those students that are transitioning from high school into college that we have deemed and identified as having very minor to some of the most profound deficiencies, if you will, as it relates to math and ELA in preparation of being college and career ready. And so what I'll do is I'll spend a little bit of time talking to you all a little bit about our Ready for High School Math and Literacy courses. We've actually began implementing these courses at the middle school level going into our second year. So this is our second year of implementation for our Ready for High School Math and Literacy. At the onset of offering these courses, we initially wanted to open these courses up only to 8th grade students. It's been within the last year where we've decided to actually open these courses up also for 9th grade students that may not be ready for English 1 or Algebra 1. And so our Ready for High School Math and Literacy courses are now open for any student that is in grades 8 or 9. We've also put some parameters in place as it relates to our teacher training. So during the teacher training, which is a 3-day recommended training for any teacher in the state of Mississippi that is offering these courses, these particular course trainings allow our teachers to actually spend time learning about what are the instructional practices that are needed for our Ready for High School Math and Literacy courses. And the reason that these particular course trainings are so long is because we want to make sure that our teachers have the instructional strategies they need, for example, in the math course, to dig deep into what we've identified as the biggest areas of weakness that many of our students are coming into high school with. And so our middle school course, and 8th and 9th grade course, for math, spend some time looking at operations with fractions. There's some time for the number system, ratio and proportional relationships, expressions, equations, and inequalities, and then, of course, functions and linear relationships. As a result of reviewing our data at the state level, we were fully aware that our students were having difficulties in these main areas as they transition from middle school into high school. As it relates to our Ready for High School Literacy course. This particular course allows our teachers to spend time identifying lessons and very rich tasks that allow our students to complete authentic written assignments. And then also, how do they begin to explore a variety of complex text? So there's some time in the training where our teachers are able to begin developing lesson plans around our Ready for High School courses. For our students that are not ready to enter credit-bearing courses at the high school level, at the college level, we have implemented 2 separate courses at the 12th grade. And so we're one of a host of states that offer the SREB Math Ready and Literacy Ready courses for 12th grade students. Now, for this particular course, our students must be classified as 12th grade students, or they could be an 11th grader that has also received the number of credit hours possible for them to be classified as 12th graders. But this particular course has an ACT requirement in place for our students. And so over the last few years, the state of Mississippi has mandated that all students at the junior year take the ACT. And so all schools and districts are required to begin reviewing their ACT data for any student that has an ACT English sub-score or math sub-score below 15. Any student at the 12th grade level that has that particular score range on the ACT is required to take the SREB Math Ready and Literacy Ready courses. This particular course, because of the rigor, also has a 3-day teacher training implemented as well. And so any teacher that is assigned the SREB course must attend a 3-day training and earn an additional endorsement. Those 900-level endorsements are a requirement that have also been placed in our state board policies and our accreditation standards. We also have an Essentials for College Math and Literacy courses that are fashioned a little bit, they're very comparable to the SREB course, but the difference actually is the enrollment piece as it relates to our students. So students that have an ACT sub-score of 15 or above are required to take the Essentials for College Math or College Literacy course. And when I say 15 or above, we're thinking any students between the score ranges of 15 to 18. Any student that has those particular sub-scores, as I've already previously mentioned, are required to take the SREB and Essentials courses. And so I wanted to talk to you all a little bit around our implementation and training as it relates to the 3 courses that I've just mentioned, the 3 courses for math and the 3 courses for literacy. So any teacher in the state that wants to teach these courses, any person that wants to offer training around these courses must receive a master credentialing where they're identified as a master teacher training. Those particular certifications are typically offered outside of the state by national experts, and that particular training is usually around 3 days to one week long. We also require that any facilitator or trainer for these courses participate in a series of classroom observations. Those classroom observations are done in classrooms of other master teacher trainers, and we also require that they spend some time looking at teacher data as it relates to their implementation of the course and how they actually work with students. And then finally, our implementation and training also requires that we spend a considerable amount of time looking at the feedback after each one of our training sessions. And so we're looking at the types of questions that our trainers are all asking during the training, in addition to the types of questions that our teachers are asking. We spend some time also looking at the types of questions that may arise as a result of the types of text that are being used in the training, and also the types of tasks that are being engaged in throughout the training. And so implementation and training in the state of Mississippi is very robust. We don't take it lightly because we're also thinking about the caliber of students that are going to be enrolled in these courses. And so our master teacher training, classroom observations, and feedback are actually on a continuous cycle throughout the entire implementation year. So one of the things that I've mentioned to you all is that we have an actual state board policy in place around our transitional courses. Again, trying to move away from the word remediation, but we have an actual state board adopted policy as it relates to our transitional courses. So beginning with the 2017-2018 school year, any LEA, again our high schools that offer the essentials course must adhere to the following requirements. The teachers must have above the 7 through 12 math or ELA endorsement, earning a separate credentialing at the 900 level. And in addition to that, we've also put in place that any school or district that is in violation of these particular series of 6 requirements will result in an accreditation violation of Accountability Standards 2 and 26. And we just feel that given the caliber of students that these courses are intended to support, it was very important for us to put a policy in place around what was required for the teachers, what's required for our students. And then we also have a policy in partnership with our IHLs. One of the things that was really important for implementation in the state is that not only did our IHL, some states call them IHEs, Institutions of Higher Education, but in addition to offering the training for teachers, it was very important that we had a partnership with our IHLs where they also sit in on the 3-day training. This was one of the requirements, if you will, that we put in place with our IHL, so that they would be able to see the rigor that's involved in each of these transitional courses. And as a result of IHL faculty from the math and the English and or reading departments at each of our IHLs, sitting in on this training, we were able to craft a policy in partnership with them around our remedial courses, our transitional courses for our 12th grade students. And so what you see here on your screen is an excerpt from Policy 608, which basically indicates that any student that takes our transition courses for 12th graders that, again, have not pretty much met the benchmark for ACT and college readiness, as long as that student completes our essentials course with an 80 or above, they will not be required to take remedial courses college at the collegiate level for college algebra and English composition. This particular policy is in place at all 8 of our public universities in the state of Mississippi. Really quickly before my time runs out, I wanted to share with you all the impact that these courses have had on our 12th grade performance on the ACT. And so what you will see here is a breakout of data for our literacy ready courses and our math ready courses. This is actually combined data from our SREB course with our essentials course. And so what I'd like for you all to kind of see is that we've made tremendous gains for those students that have enrolled in our SREB and or essentials courses at the 12th grade. Our biggest gain, as you can see, has been right here in science, where the typical student's improvement score on the science section of the ACT has increased 3.2 points, and that's a tremendous gain. Again, all of our ACTs, our juniors are required to take the ACT at the junior year. And then we also see some gains as it relates to students that were enrolled in the literacy ready course and then retook the ACT post-enrollment in our courses. And so we're very excited to see this uptick in improvement at the high school level for students that are enrolling in remedial and transitional courses prior to entering college. Overall, we have seen a tremendous gain, not only as a result of our essentials and SREB courses, but we've seen tremendous gains as it relates to ACT achievement overall in the state of Mississippi. Our 11th graders are meeting all 4 ACT benchmarks, remaining at 9%. Our grade 11 ACT composite score has increased across the entire, increased over the entire state from 17.6 in the year 2015 to 17.8 in the year 2018. And then we have held pretty steady for the class of 2018 composite scores, while the national average dropped a small percentage in the year 2017. And so we just thought it was very important as a practitioner to share with you all the steps that we've put in place to ensure a continuum of support from our students that are transitioning from middle school to high school and to college. And one piece that I would love to definitely bring out before my time runs out is the fact that we spent a lot of time at the State Department working with classroom teachers, working with practitioners, working with consultants, and also working with IHL to ensure that the readiness courses provide a beautiful alignment with our college and career readiness standards. And so any student that has enrolled in our remedial transitional courses does not see a break in content. And so we believe that these are some of the practices that have led to the improved achievement that we began to see over the last few years in the state of Mississippi. Of course, our overall goal being to ensure that our students are college and career ready and that they have the skills that are necessary to perform in outside of the classroom.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for that presentation. We'd now like to take on some of these questions. Thank you for all the questions that have come in on the chat. I'll start with this one about the Tennessee sales program for Dr. Boatman. Did the treatment group include all the students in the sales program or only those students who were successful in passing the course?
This is a really good question. We included all students who took the sales course, but we did not restrict it to just the students who passed the course. We did look at the pass rates of the sales program, and they're actually very high across the state. There is some differentiation by high school, but across the state it's about upwards of 90% of students that enroll in the course pass the sales course. So the estimates wouldn't be that different, but we did not restrict it to the students that just passed. We ran some descriptive numbers for the state, just to provide the state with some data about the differences between the students who passed versus did not pass. The state was obviously very interested in that. But for our analysis, our technical analysis, we included students regardless of if they completed the course or not.
Thank you. So for Dr. Davis about the program in Mississippi, a couple of people have asked, did students get a credit for the remedial math course? Did it count toward graduation, and did they get a high school credit?
And so I just want a point of clarity. Are we speaking about our 8th and 9th grade course or our 12th grade? And so let me give a little point of clarity. Our grade 8 and 9th grade Ready for High School course does offer a math and an ELA reading Carnegie unit. So the answer to that is yes. Those particular credits are considered lower than Algebra 1 and lower than English 1. And so any student that earns those Carnegie units are still required to earn 3 additional maths or 3 additional English credits. For the 12th grade course, they do offer a Carnegie unit as well, and those are considered higher than Algebra 1, higher than English 2. And they do, for some students, it does serve as their 4th year math or 4th year English, depending on how they've earned their credits. So both courses do offer Carnegie units. Great question.
Thank you. So looking back at the sales program in Tennessee, Dr. Boatman, are you collecting data on which college math course students took following sales?
Yes. We've worked closely with the folks within the colleges to identify the 4 most popular math courses, I believe, the 3 to 4 most common math courses that students enrolled in for college level math. We have not yet linked students' remediation requirements with any particulars regarding their proposed field of study and how that impacts the math courses that they take. This would be a next step of this work, is to think about the individual math course and how that impacts a student's trajectory in either a STEM field or progress through other types of degrees. But yes, we have broken out the math courses by the different course options that students might take. I don't believe we report on this in the full report, but it is something that we have looked at the request of the state as well. They were interested in differences by different types of courses.
Great. So now another question, Dr. Davis, for you about Mississippi's program. So to clarify, do students take the ACT twice?
So no, students are only required by state board policy to take it as juniors. The students that are in the study that I shared in the presentation were offered an opportunity to retest after taking the state-mandated ACT test as juniors. And that opportunity to retest was actually, if we called them pilot sites, of course, because we were looking at study data, any of those schools that opted in to have their students retest after taking our 12th grade readiness courses were provided a voucher to retest.
And Dr. Davis, one other clarifying question about the model. Someone asked, who is training the master trainer? Was that a reference to somebody outside the state?
Yes, really great question. So any teacher that's receiving the master trainer credentialing actually do go through training with the Southern Region Educational Board.
Great, thanks.
SREB.
So, Dr. Boatman, there's a question about the sales program. Is there any sunsetting of the sales students' eligibility in college?
I'm assuming that just means that if a student doesn't enroll in college immediately or take some time in taking their math requirement, does that sunset? I guess that's how I'm interpreting that question. And the answer is that a student who completes the sales program successfully in high school is supposed to be exempt from the remediation requirement regardless of when that is. So to my knowledge, that would stay with the student throughout different semesters, unless I am not understanding the use of sunsetting there.
Great, thank you. And then another question for you about more the study design. Was there a comparison group for the improvements in pre to post tests?
So our assessment of learning gains was looking at students above and below the cutoff. So we did not see improvements. That might make me wonder if that's a question for Mississippi. But we did not observe improvements at that cutoff. But again, I would offer the clarification that we were just able, given that study design, we were only able to look at students with a point or two to the left of the cutoff and a point or two to the right. So that's a pretty narrow band of students that were eligible for the sales program. And so we're not able to talk about learning gains that may or may not have existed below that ACT cutoff. And I think that's an area for future research, especially given that we saw some of the positive impacts of sales were being captured by the lower scoring students. But just given the study methodology and the way that we could isolate that cutoff, we weren't able to draw conclusions about students further below that cutoff.
And I see we've got a clarification. That was actually a question intended for Mississippi. So Dr. Davis, for those pre to post test improvements that you shared from from Mississippi students, was there a comparison group for that?
Okay, I'm sorry. I just heard the end of that tail question. Was there a comparison group?
For the when you showed the improvements in pre to post test, was there a comparison group for that study?
No, this was actually one of the first studies of this type for the state, and so the answer not at this point. But we do have plans to actually duplicate this study with a larger population of students in the state.
Great, thank you. So this is a question about the sales program. and I believe this may have been answered, but was there a teacher in the room, or was it entirely students working self-paced on computers?
Yeah, no, there is always a teacher in the room. So the teacher is in a lot of the sales classrooms that I visited, this teacher is usually roaming the room, speaking with individual students, answering questions in a more one-on-one basis, but it is taking place during a typical class session, and so the teacher is in the classroom, getting the class started, adjourning it when it's over, but it's just more the sort of middle portion of the class is where the teacher sort of takes a back seat and the computer is largely providing the instruction.
Thanks. And we had another question about that program. Who wrote the online math sales program, and how were students selected for it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was originally conceived by some members of the math faculty at one of the community colleges, Chattanooga State Community College in Tennessee, who partnered with Pearson to develop the course itself. So the software was a Pearson product, My Math Lab, and they began piloting that. That was what was being used in the community college, and so then the sales pilot came out of that, where they used that same software to then move that into the high schools. And the program since has, evaluated the use of Pearson and thought about different models, but when it originally was developed, it was a Pearson product.
So Dr. Davis, in looking at Mississippi again, someone is asking, is any work being done in the state on de-emphasizing algebra at the college level and replacing it with discrete math or statistics?
We're not actually engaged in any conversations along those lines, but simply because, not that that's not a priority conversation, it's just not one that we're having at the moment. But we actually had we actually have standalone discrete math and standalone statistics courses that we actually absorbed into our new framework across grades 10, 11, and 12. And so I don't know if that kind of gets to the answer, but I just would probably say at this moment in time, it's not one that we've had, at this moment.
And another question for you from Mississippi. What does the teacher training look like? Does it focus on pedagogy, instructional strategies, or content?
Well, it actually all of our trainings actually deal with both. And so the very, very first day of the 3-day training spends a considerable amount of time on the first half of day one, really understanding the depth of knowledge of the teachers that are actually in the training. The second part of the day one spends a lot of time talking about how do you ensure the depth of knowledge is at the level it needs to be for the teachers that are going to be going into day 2 and day 3. Day 2 and day 3 actually spend a lot of time around instructional strategies. It allows the teachers the actual engagement with the activities and the tasks that are going to be put in front of their students. And then the latter part of day 3 is actually something that we probably would coin as a demonstration, where we place and I think a lot of states do something similar, but we actually allow our teachers to get into small groups and do a demonstration of an actual lesson. And that's an opportunity for the facilitators to provide feedback around how do you differentiate instruction for the caliber of student that's in these courses. And so while many of our students in these courses will have a similar ACT sub-score, we provide some tips on how do you differentiate instruction around particular deficiencies. And so I hope that kind of answers the question around how we do our 3-day trainings.
So going back to Tennessee, there's a question asking for clarification, I believe, about the findings you were discussing previously, Dr. Boatman. So he's asking, what was the 50% pass rate for the students just below the cutoff that passed the test different than the pass rate for those comparison students just above the cut score in terms of pass rate on the sales course?
Right. So the 50% pass rate was largely related to the students below the cutoff. So it's sort of saying of the sales program did bring more students into college level math. And so with more students entering college level math, there was an increase in overall numbers of students passing college-level math because there were more students in college-level math, but that of the students that were brought in as a result of the sales program, only about half of those students that were brought in as a result of the program passed the course. So it's related to the sales-eligible students that are below the cutoff.
Okay, great, thank you. And then this is a question for Tennessee. What is a typical student if the change in the average scores is 1.8 points? I don't know if we need some clarification maybe on that question.
Also, I wonder if that question might also be for Mississippi. Could it be?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sounds like it. Anita, maybe you can clarify on that. So does that, Dr. Davis, does that sound like that's one for you? What is a typical student given where your average score was and the change in average scores was 1.8 points?
And so I'm trying to say that I'm trying to understand the question one more time. What was the
why don't we come back to that one while Anita types that back in. I think she was typing up a clarification. Here we go. So in looking at the Mississippi scores on the ACT scores, there's a column that says change for typical student, but there's another one that refers to the change in average score. So I think she's trying to understand what does that next column indicate.
Gotcha. So what we did is we did an actual aggregate where we evaluated our scores across the entire subgroup. And then we actually took an actual approach where we identified the average improvement, just a typical arithmetic mean across each one of the groups. And so there's some extra data that was not included in the slides that we shared with you all that looks at subgroup data across gender, across race, across socioeconomic status that's not included, and that's where that data comes from. And I'm sorry that we didn't include it. Yeah, we didn't include it in the data point on the slide. Great question.
Okay, thank you. These are all great questions. So at the end of this webinar, your browser is going to redirect you to a survey. We really encourage you to just take a minute and send us some feedback so that we can keep improving our webinars. I want to thank Dr. Angela Boatman and Dr. Marla Davis so much for sharing their insights and experience. As a reminder, you can download the Tennessee Sales Evaluation Report as well as today's slides in the download box. And there's also 2 reports there from our colleagues at other regional educational laboratories about remediation work done in Oregon and Florida. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to Shanna.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. Today's webinar recording will be archived and uploaded to IES's YouTube channel as well as to our website. If you registered for today's webinar, you'll receive an email from us with a link to the recording once it's ready. Additionally, don't forget to download any of those files because the will close. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you all so much.